Monteen. My name is Claire. This is actually my first year on staff as a teacher. Some of you have met me. My family is one of the first families to have joined Trinity Academy. We felt led by God to be a part of this organization from the very beginning, and so I have 3 children who you might see pop in and out of here because they have band camp today. My oldest is going to be a sophomore. My name is Gloria. My second is going to be a 7th grader. My name is Miriam. And my youngest is going to be a 6th grader. His name is Moses. And they love school. They love being here. They cannot wait to come back to school. We've been here for days getting my room ready, painting and painting pictures, and they have willingly and gladly came and painted and been a part of that process. So you will get to meet them hopefully at some point, or your children will get to meet them at some point. For the first 7 years of the organization, I served as the board chairman here, and really enjoyed that, loved that, learned so much from the people that I had the opportunity to serve with. And then last year, we wrote our bylaws so that no person could serve indefinitely as a board member. Last year was my, you have to take a year off year. Couldn't continue to serve, and so my husband gratefully took me back into our home so that I could actually be home sometimes. And I had a year of rest. And Mr. Murray, halfway through the year of rest, said, "Would you teach next year?" And I said, "No, I will not teach next year. There's no way. I have no interest in teaching." And then God said, I think right up here, I hope I'm on that one. And then over the summer, God really worked on my heart and said, "You would really like to teach, and you really know this material." So this year, at God's insistence, I will be teaching 11th and 12th grade literature and history. We'll be doing the modern era, and that's why you see a lot of things in this room relate to the modern era. There's lots of 1920s art and fashion and things that have to do with the Soviet Union and communism and advances in space technology. When you look around, this is the type of environment that we really want to present to our students at Trinity Academy. If we want them to learn classically and to think outside the box, we want them to be inspired by the things around them. So if by chance they're listening to me and they're not really paying attention, they can wander off and look at something that's worthwhile. It's worth looking at. It's worth contemplating as well as what we're saying. But this morning is called The Morning with the Muses, and this is an opportunity for our new co-teachers or our co-teachers who didn't have the opportunity to go through this training last year to get an idea of the types of things that we do in classical education. Most of the times people kind of go, "I don't have a clue what you're talking about when we say classical education. Do you just play classical music?" Well, we do play classical music. We like classical music. But it's more than that. And all of you have applied, and so all of you have read Dr. Perrin's Introduction to Classical Education. So you have an idea of the whys, of why that kind of came back into fashion, why a lot of people started binding together and saying there has to be more to education than what it looks like right now. And so here at Trinity, we believe that what we learn in our youth really affects what we love as a human being. So what we are trying to do here is to present things and to put things in front of our children, in front of our students, that will shape and form their loves as they move forward. The world is a very confusing and distracting place right now. We want to tone that down and to put things that are good and true and beautiful in front of them, so that when they go into the world, they can themselves discern what is true and good and beautiful. The best way to learn something is to see it done. And then you can go and model what that person has done. So that's what our teachers here are trying to do. They're trying to model those good things and those true things. And hopefully our students pick up on that and they're inspired by that. That's our prayer and that's our hope every day. So this morning, you just get a touch of that. You get to learn some of the terminology that we learn, some of the tactics and the techniques that we use as we do that. I'm going to try to touch on grammar school all the way up through the upper school. Typically I focus on grammar school, but actually we have a lot of, we have some 7th and 8th grade parents in here, right? Raise your hand if your child is a 7th or an 8th grader. Okay. So some of this is going to give you some background, and your child won't do as much of this kind of thing. They'll be in the next stages. So classical education, just an overview, we see it as a grammar stage, a dialectic or a logic stage, and then a rhetoric stage. The grammar stage covers those facts. It's where their minds are just rhyming and singing and pulling these things together, and we think of that as an opportunity for us to fill them full of those good facts. And when they get into that logic phase, when they start asking lots of why questions, why do I have to do that? Why do I have to clean my room? How long We want them to be able to peg off of those things that they learned in the grammar stage and be able to start putting those things together in a succinct way that helps them understand what it is that they're studying. So for example, and mathematics is a really easy one. In the early grades, we teach them their math facts, right? They learn how to add. They learn that 2 plus 2 is 4, and they learn that 2 plus 4 is 6, and they learn that 2 plus 8 is 10. And then when they get to that logic stage and they start doing some of that pre-algebra, they have to use those math facts really quickly to be able to work the systems of mathematics that we're asking them to work through. We're not teaching them to add again. We're teaching them to use those facts to work through a more complex system. Maybe history. They've learned about ancient Rome and ancient Greece, but they haven't really learned about how the Roman Empire affected Jesus' time. Okay, they know who Caesar is, they know when Rome was, they know where it fits in history, but they haven't really thought about what that means to our faith and what it meant to have a Roman governor in Jerusalem at that time, and that why did Jesus go and stand before a Roman governor and be given a sentence? So they're starting to take those simple facts and put them into something, and then that rhetoric phase, which is that upper school phase, 10th to 12th grade, is the grade when we ask them to be able to communicate all of that on their own. So they have to understand the facts, they have to understand the why of how the facts fit together, and now they have to be able to communicate it persuasively, clearly, concisely, so that they can then go into the world and be able to defend their hearts and their faiths. They can go into the world and be a voice and a light for Christ. They can go into the world and understand the things that are going on around them, be able to take them in and comprehend them, and have articulate dialogues with the people in their lives and the people in the world. And that's our hope and our prayer for them, that we take them through those 3 phases. And they'll be doing all of those things in all of the 3 phases. There's just more of a focus on those things. So our younger students are still going to stand up in front of their peers, and they're still going to recite things, which technically would be rhetoric. They still have to be able to speak in front of everybody else, but they're practicing easy rhetoric tactics and easy rhetoric exercises. And they'll still be evaluating some things. They just won't be really diving into debates. We're not going to ask them to get up in front of their class and debate a topic to each other, which is what we are asking our 7th through 9th graders to do. And our upper school rhetoric students are going to be examining and really diving into concepts as well. We're just going to be asking them to present them in more advanced ways, and we're going to be focusing on that part of what they're learning. Hopefully that makes sense. So that being said, moving all the way through those, our heart is not just to grow these little brains. We're not about test scores. We don't want a whole bunch of really high SAT scores here. Not that we don't want high SAT scores. That'd be great if we have high SAT scores. But our focus is to see the whole person developed. We don't just want their minds to take a bunch of information in and be able to go out into the world and go to a good college. We want to see their hearts understand how to love each other. We want to see their desires and their wants and their wills focused on the things that are important and worthwhile in the world. Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. So mind is one of those pieces, but we want to see all of those pieces worked with here. And so that's why when you look at our core values, or you look at our verbiage that we have used to outline what we do here, a lot of it focuses on virtue and on heart issues. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So more than just a morality or an academic, we offer an instruction in virtue. And virtue are those intangible things that we can't even really put a name to sometimes, but we know that they are worthwhile. Something like courage. We all admire courage when we see it. We hear stories of courage, and it swells something in our hearts, and it makes us long to congratulate that person or to emulate that. Those are the types of virtues that we're talking about, that we want to teach them about, we want them to grow in. So this morning, we call this the morning with the Muses. Does anybody know? This is going to be a back and forth. You guys are going to have to talk to me. Does anybody know who the Muses are?
Are they from Greek mythology?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Music, poetry.
Yes.
Don't ask me to name them. I think there's 9 of them in total, but I don't
That's
know.
really, really good that you knew that there were 9. Actually, last year I didn't even, when I was teaching this, I thought, I think there are 7.
I used to be obsessed with Greek mythology when I was younger.
Well, you may have read
Don't put me on the spot.
this book. So this is a great Greek mythology book. It's one of our texts that we use in the lower grades, and I'm going to read to you guys from it because we do a lot of reading out loud. Even in 12th grade, we are going to do a lot of reading out loud. Some people are auditory learners, some people are visual learners. We try to get the information out to students as much as possible. If we were in a classroom, I would probably have this book in front of all of you, and you would all be reading along with it as well, so that you would have that opportunity, but I don't think we have enough copies, so you just have to listen to me. The 9 Muses were the daughters of Zeus and the Titans, and the Titaness Mnemosyne. Their mother's memory was as long as her beautiful hair, for she was the goddess of memory and knew all that had happened since the beginning of time. She gathered her 9 daughters around her and told them wondrous tales. She told them about the creation of the earth and the fall of the Titans, about the glorious Olympians and their rise to power, about Prometheus, who stole the heavenly fire, about the sun and the stars, and most of all about the greatness and wisdom of their father Zeus. The 9 Muses listened to her with wide, sparkling eyes and turned her stories into poems and songs so they would never be forgotten. Apollo, the god of music, trained them and taught them to sing harmoniously together. He led the choir of Muses through the halls of Olympus and over the slopes of Mount Parnassus, and their music rang so pure and fine that even the songbirds fell silent to listen. Each of the Muses had her own special art. Calliope, the music of heroic poetry, was the first among them. She had a mortal son named Orpheus, and he sang almost as beautifully as the Muses themselves. When he was grown, he left his mother and his 8 loving aunts and went to live in his father's kingdom of Thrace to bring the joy of music to earth. Sorry, I probably didn't need to read that part. But their names are all here. If you'd like to look at them, I'm not going to read them either. But they are the muse of lyric, music, comedy, tragedy, dance, astronomy, history, hymns, and epics. Or that's that epic poetry that we were talking about. We call this Morning with the Muses because this is a wide breadth, and these are many of the tools that we use to impart these concepts of virtue. When you think of the Bible and you think of the way that the Bible teaches us, the way the Scripture is written, Scripture gives us narrative. In Genesis, we have lots of narrative about Abraham and the stories that our kids learn in Sunday school. Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, and Egypt, and Moses, and the 10 plagues of Egypt. So that's history. But the Bible also is full of poetry. It's full of songs. David wrote songs and poems in the Psalms. And so this is a way to parse out some of the ways that people learn and some of the ways that people are inspired. So we're going to use some of these tools today. And the first one we were going to do, you guys heard music playing when you came in. And that music is by a composer named Mendelssohn. Does anybody know anything about Felix Mendelssohn?
He was a classical composer.
He was a classical composer. That's excellent. Good job. Anything else? Yes. So when Felix Mendelssohn was 17 years old, he toured Italy, and he came back and he wrote this composition when he was 17 years old, which is astounding to me. And this is what he said about this composition and about that time. More than anything else, I have the ruins, the images, and the gaiety of nature to thank for my music. Mendelssohn was very inspired by the things around him, and he spoke through music. So we're going to just do a listening exercise. We're going to do a quick listening exercise to start our day. Oftentimes our teachers will do this. They will have music playing when the students come in. They'll ask the kids to be quiet. It's a good exercise to be quiet, to work on your listening skills. At the end of this, it's a very short piece. It's only about a minute, 40 seconds long, which is going to seem like an eternity. I'm telling you, you're all going to be looking around and be like, when is this going to be over? A minute and 41 seconds. When we're done with that minute and 41 seconds, we're going to talk about what you heard. What were the themes? What were the feelings that you heard in this? What was Mendelssohn trying to communicate? So hopefully you can hear this. If not, I may have to turn the air conditioner on for this part. Scott, will you just go ahead and turn the air conditioner on? Thank you. Raise your hand and tell me.
Disney cartoon.
It made you think of Disney cartoons?
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
I see that. It's really interesting.
So what about a Disney cartoon? What specifically about Disney cartoon? Anyone can answer.
Just the action. I mean, you could see the action, you know, with the crescendos and
It was intentional on his part to do that. That's how he introduced this kind of music to children. His intention.
it's effective. It's very effective.
It's very compelling, isn't it? You hear it and you can't think what's
Yeah, it's like the build up to the intensity.
Yeah, and there were some less intense parts and more intense parts. That's true. Yeah.
For me, it kind of paints a picture of a ballet almost,
Okay.
if you will, like fairies dancing and then they have to like run away from something or go into hiding. For me, it paints a picture of that.
Yeah, for
As
sure.
weird as that sounds.
Yeah.
I was very surprised by the ending.
Why?
The ending was very forceful.
Okay.
I kind of expected it to sort of fade out, but then there was this very forceful ending.
What do you mean by forceful?
Loud and heavy.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Nobody knows that piece, do you? Anybody know what the name of that is? So that is actually the Fairy March. I'll look at that. I heard one person, one parent described it as butterfly E one time in class. And I thought that's hilarious. Butterfly E, okay. It's called the Fairy March. And this is a piece from Mendelssohn's entire composition that highlights A Midsummer Night's Dream. You guys may be familiar with A Midsummer Night's Dream. That is a play written by William Shakespeare. It was written in 1595 or 96. And Mendelssohn was inspired in Italy to think about A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that's what made him write this piece. So when we talk about Mendelssohn writing a piece of music that is inspired not only by the world that he sees and the faith that he had, Mendelssohn was an extremely faithful man from his youth all the way until his death. But he was also inspired by a piece of literature. And in classical education, what we really want to do is we want to tie things together. We don't want things to be on islands. Literature's over here and mathematics is over here and they never crisscross. Well, that's really not the way that the world works. God gave us a beautiful world and the entire world tells us about him. Not just the Bible and what we read in the Bible, But also the beautiful patterns in nature show his order, his consistency. And what do we do with those patterns in nature? Well, we write them down as numbers, and that's how we work mathematics. Geometry really is the ratios of nature. It's just our students manipulating those ratios of nature. So when we're asking our students to put these things together, as Mendelssohn did, what we're really trying to get them to do is to wrap their mind around a big God, a superior, amazing God who created all of these things. And he's not absent from any of the beauty in the world. It's all his. So another thing that we do with our students is we talk a lot about God. We talk about our faith. And at the beginning of the day, we spend time in prayer with our students. From the biddies all the way to the big kids. The big kids have a homeroom in the morning where they do devotions and they share prayer concerns. And so we're going to take a little bit of time this morning and we're going to pray together. So are there any prayer concerns in the room? I know everybody's got a student entering a new school. Some of us have students entering a new school, and that's obviously a prayer concern. But anything beyond that? St. Augustine said in his book Confessions, "Lord, you are my King and my God. Let every useful thing I learned as a boy be devoted now to your service. Let whatever I speak, write, read, or count serve you." We try to put our learning tools, we try to use things here that are time-worn and tested, that history has told us these things are worthwhile. And nothing really screams that more than our literature lists. If you have looked at all of our curriculum, our literature lists, they are curated like a museum. We are very specific about the works that we use. They are purposeful and intentional for a reason. I'm going to use one of them today as we learn. It is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. If you have a fifth grader, your fifth grader is going to be reading this. It's an excellent book for any age, so if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Secret Garden is about a young girl named Mary. She is born to British parents in India. She's their only child. And both of them sadly pass away at the very beginning of the book. And Mary is sent to live with her Uncle Craven in England, who she has never met before. If some of you know this story, you'll follow along. What we learn about Mary when she goes to live with Uncle Craven is that she's a very contrary Mary. Very contrary Mary. She's not the nicest child. She is not nice to the servants. She is not nice to the world. She's just not a very nice child. And we learn in flashbacks that a lot of it has to do with the fact that she didn't have a lot of attention from her parents, and she really wasn't held to very high standards, and she's scared and confused, and she has no idea who she is. And that's compounded by the fact that now she's leaving the only place she's ever known and going into a grand mansion with dark corners and scary noises. So Mistress Mary spends her time talking to only servants. Her Uncle Craven is never home, so she has no relationship with him. And we get to watch her development through the course of this book as God works on her heart, and he uses different things to work on her heart. So in front of you, you have an excerpt from The Secret Garden. And if you guys want to just pull that, there should be enough copies for everybody to have one. Who would like to read this out loud for us? Okay. No, okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
He chirped and talked and coaxed, and he hopped, and flirted his tail and twittered. It was as if he were talking. His red waistcoat was like satin, and he puffed his tiny breast out. It was so fine and so grand and so pretty that it was really as if he were showing her how important and like a human person a robin could be. Mistress Mary forgot that she had ever been contrary in her life when he allowed her to draw closer and closer to him and bend down and talk and try to make something like robin sounds. Oh, to think that he should actually let her come as near to him as that. He knew nothing in the world would make her put out her hand toward him or startle him in the least tiniest way. He knew it was because he was a real person, only nicer than any other person in the world. She was so happy and that she scarcely dared to breathe.
Mistress Mary has made an acquaintance here. Who has Mistress Mary met?
Robin.
Robin, yeah, little Robin. And this Robin is behaving in an interesting way. So take a look at that first sentence. If you guys have not heard yet, we do a lot of grammar at Trinity Academy. We talk about how sentences are made. We talk about nouns, we talk about verbs, we talk about adverbs and adjectives and participles and clauses. Because when they go and they read the Declaration of Independence, they need to understand what a word's job is if they're going to be able to understand these complex texts that we read later. That also prepares them to enter into a study of Latin. If they understand what the parts of speech are, they can really better understand another language and how to manipulate that other language. Latin happens to be a language of many words, or few words, many endings. So those words can go in any order, but their ending tells you what kind of word that they are. And so learning the parts of speech and the jobs that they do helps our students to really transition more easily to thinking in that terminology. In that first sentence, take a look at that first sentence. She chirped and talked and coaxed. He hopped and flirted his tail and twittered. There are a lot of verbs in that sentence. Who can tell me what a verb is? Action. It's an action, right? So it's a word that shows action. And we have a song. We have a song for just about everything. But your kids will learn the Shirley Grammar songs and you will get to sing them with them. Singing was not my favorite part of classical education, but I did it. And you know what? My kids remember all these songs. I could bring them in here right now and say, sing the verb song, and they would, even my 10th grader would go, a verb shows action, there's no doubt. It shows what the subject does, like sing and shout. You can sing all of the songs about what these parts of speech do. But take a look at that sentence. Chirped, talked, coaxed, hopped, flirted, twittered. 6 verbs in one sentence. And how much more exciting are those verbs than the dog ran? We can write the dog ran on the board, and we can talk about dog as the subject and ran as the verb. And we might make them simpler at times for our students to be able to take a breath. But when I talk about putting things that are true and good and beautiful in front of our students, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Now, if we were in a lower class, maybe first and second graders, I may ask Rachel to get up and demonstrate flirting his tail. But I won't, because we're not in a first grade classroom. But think about how much fun a first grader would have with flirting their tail. And Burnett, as she wrote this, certainly had to be thinking about children and engaging children in every part of their senses. When I read that sentence, she chirped and talked and coaxed, in my mind, I am imagining how this little girl is engaging with this bird. I can picture that in my head, and I can think about her reaction. Now, that's a super amazing sentence. That first sentence is so much fun. We can spend a lot of time on that first sentence. But the whole passage is really interesting. It's very, very interesting. And we are teaching our students literary terminology so that they can take into their bank of tools. Again, we're reading this in 5th grade. We're reading Milton's Paradise Lost in 10th grade. So when we are learning illusion or personification of an animal, in this context, that's to prepare us for Dante and Milton and those epic poets who are going to give us really rich and thick descriptions later. And then those authors are then going to influence our Frankensteins and our, that we're going to do in 12th grade. And as we go into the world, those things are going to affect everything that we're reading. So can anybody point out what the personification is? Or does anybody know what personification is?
It's giving human characteristics to an inanimate object or something that's not human.
That's exactly right, yes, giving human characteristics to something that is not human. And of course, in this example, the bird is given human characteristics, right? What are the human characteristics that Mary gives the bird?
Well, she describes his appearance as if he's clothed.
She does, yeah. His red waistcoat is like satin. They're really just feathers, but man, that puts a picture in your mind, doesn't it? What else?
It was as though he was interacting with her.
Yeah, she gives him a mindset, right? He knows that she would never hurt him. She gives him a conscious mindset. And she gives him a title of the nicest person in the world. Poor Mary. Don't you feel bad for her that she's never met anyone? Robin is the nicest person she's ever met in the world. She was so happy that she scarcely dared to breathe. So, reading something like this, and recognizing that it has beautiful, rich language is lovely. But we also want our students to know the story. And we want them to understand the narrative of what's going on in context. And again, that's very important. When we read scripture and we look at scripture, we can pull a verse out, or we can take that verse in context and try to really understand what the author is trying to convey to us. When Paul is writing one of his letter to the Philippians, understanding who the Philippians are and looking at chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 and chapter 4 help us to understand that entire narrative of what Paul is trying to get across. So one of the ways that we do that, where we give our students a piece of literature, a story, and we help them to practice understanding what that story is telling us, is called narration. And you will see that on your homework, no matter what grade you are in. My 12th graders, their very first assignment is to go home and to write a narration of the first thing that we are going to read in class. Narration is taking a piece and being able to retell that piece in your own words. You're going to want to do it succinctly, you're going to want to do it clearly, you're going to want to make sure that you're not adding anything to the story, but you're also going to want to make sure you're not leaving anything important out. And this is a super important skill going on into life. So think about this. When you read a newspaper article or read an article that affects the way that you think about something, a political candidate. You have an opinion about a political candidate, you read an article and there's something shocking in that and you think, wow, that's really interesting. And then you want to go and you want to discuss that with maybe a trusted advisor. You need to be able to recall what that article said, narrate what that article said to that trusted advisor so that you can have an accurate conversation. Otherwise, you hand the article to them and say, read that, and then I want to talk to you about it. Which, that's fine too, but that's not always practical. What's another example? You, heaven forbid, witness an accident, and you have to be able to give a narration of what happened in that accident. You cannot add things to that. You need to be able to tell succinctly what happened. And so we are going to do a little exercise here. There is some paper in front of you, or you can write just right at the bottom here. I want everybody to take, stop that clock, just straight up stop.
Yeah, I'll pass batteries for it.
So it is 20 minutes to 10. I'm going to give you all about 5 minutes to go ahead and write a narration of this, and some people are going to be called in front to read. It's okay. I want you guys to know what your students are going through because they're going to be coming to the front and reading too. And so if they're nervous about this, if they come home and they're like, oh, I've got to write a narration, you can say, Mama wrote a narration in her class too. It's okay. We're gonna get through it together. It's not a big deal. So go ahead and take about 5 minutes and create your narration. And then from another school, and he was somebody who had cut his teeth in gospel school teaching upper school Latin and literature. And his first few classes, he said, were all boys. All boys. And so when these moments came and they were like back and forth and calling on people, he leaned forward and goes, I'll tell you what, I teach teenage boys, I can wait you guys out. Okay, he's probably right. You probably can't wait us out. So, would anybody like to volunteer to come up and read their narration? If not, I'm going to call it. No?
I'll do it.
Great, thank you. You'll bring it up here.
Okay. Oops.
Mary was intrigued by a robin's behavior in this garden and stopped to watch it. She was so taken with its activities and personality, she began to interact with it as a robin too. The robin seemed to respond and allowed her to get closer to it than maybe she had ever been to a bird before. She didn't want to make it a pet, but a friend, and know more about the natural world.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so now we are going to give Jessica some feedback. Somebody told me something that Jessica did really well with her narration.
She described it really well in her experience.
Her descriptive words were really good, and she covered everything from front to end really well. She didn't leave anything out in the middle. Yeah, what else?
I feel like she didn't add what you had told us. You know, she was piecing it right off of what she read rather than the backstory.
The backstory of it.
Yes.
Yeah, she didn't talk at all about the backstory that I had given you. That's true. Okay. Did anybody notice anything that was something she can correct in her narration? Did she add anything to the story? Did she subtract? Did she miss something that was really important in the story? Did she misrepresent any of the characters?
I don't think she misrepresented anything necessarily, but I thought, one part that I thought was really important was that she was so enamored of this bird and so drawn in by this bird that she forgot how naughty she'd been in the past.
Oh, it said Mistress Mary forgot she had ever been contrary in her
So
life.
it almost
Yeah.
like it was
Yeah, she more focused on the joy of the interaction and not the change in Mary. Yeah. And if you read that and found that to be really important, that would stick in your mind. Anything else?
Well, one thing is, Mary seems almost more interested in the Robin's personality than about the Robin. How should I say this?
As a bird or as a part of nature?
Yeah, as a part of nature. Yeah, that's kind of what
So
I.
you felt like she kind of added that
Yeah,
the
that was-
wonder of nature was an added
That's
piece.
unclear if Mary's has that yet.
Right.
Although it could start.
Yeah.
I think she was just so desperate to make friends that you find one anywhere.
Yeah. I noticed just one thing. She said that Mary was closer to this robin than she had ever been to another bird in her life. Does it say that she was closer than she'd ever been in her
I
life?
said maybe, but
Maybe.
yeah.
Okay. So, and we are not picking on you.
Right.
This is, you did a fantastic job. That was a great narration. But we are always going to offer positive feedback to our students and corrective feedback to our students, no matter how old they are. And so all of our students are going to get used to, for us maybe that's hard. We're not used to receiving those things in such a succinct and consistent way for people to tell us, and you did this really well, but you could maybe improve this. So that's hard for us to hear, and it's maybe good for us to hear. You know, we need those friends in our lives that hold us accountable. So this prepares them to go into the world and have people come up to them and say, maybe you change your tone when you say that. I correct my husband all the time. He tries to correct me too,
But when we hear the word criticism, we automatically go on the defensive, and put our hackles up, and we automatically associate it with something negative. And maybe from certain people it is all the time, but there is such a thing as constructive criticism, and your
Absolutely.
kids have to be able to accept that without getting insulted. I mean, obviously some people think they're helping and they're not really, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next step we might take, maybe not, maybe we would finish this assignment right here, but the next step we might take is an editing portion. where then we're going to pass our paper to somebody else. We're going to trade papers right here. You're going to edit her paper, and she's going to edit your paper, and you're going to make suggestions for each other so that you can do a second draft that's better than the first draft. And you can see how to make those improvements on the first thing that you've started. Every writer, even these wonderful classic writers that we read, they were all edited. They all had throwaways. They all started writing The Dog Ran. And then they were able to write She Chirped and Talked and Coaxed and Hopped and Flirted His Tail and Twittered. We don't start being able to write this way. We have to build those skills. We have to learn those skills. And that can be, I don't want to say painful, but it can be a struggle to learn some of those things. Our students are learning to stand up in front of their peers and present what they have memorized or what they've created. And they won't always receive criticism. For example, if our students are given the assignment of memorizing a poem, they're going to come up and they're going to recite their poem, the class is going to clap, and they're going to sit down. So sometimes they're getting full on, hey, way to go, way to memorize that poem. In recitations, which is a time when in our grammar school, all of our 6th through pre-K kids get together, they present as a class to the other classes, maybe a poem they've been memorizing together, or a song they've worked on, or and the other classes all clap and give them, that recognition of that hard work that they have done. And that again is practice for that rhetoric stage that they're going to get to when they have to stand in front of the entire school, or our seniors are going to defend their thesis later on this year, or spring next year. That's a nerve-wracking thing, but we've given them so many opportunities to stand in front of people that hopefully it's not as nerve-wracking as maybe it would be for some of us who haven't had as much practice doing those kinds of things. Do you have a parent handbook yet? Did everybody give you a parent handbook yet? Maybe not. You just have a schedule. When you have your parent handbook, you don't need it right now. It's okay. I do want to point out the very first page of the parent handbook outlines, and our handbook is set up, it has bullets, and section 1 are our formational documents. They're the things that we use to define who we are and to direct the decisions that we make. So anything that says 1 point something, those are well worth reading. And I want to read our vision statement to you. It's 1.2 in your handbook when you get that copy. Because I think it's really important that as we are looking at all of these things, we take a look at it from the bottom up, but we also take a look at it from the end back. And that's what this vision statement does for us. It gives us a picture, hopefully, of what our end result is going to be, so we can work backwards from that and say, well, in order for them to be able to do that, we have to do this. But before we do this, we have to do this. Before we do this, we have to do this. And we work backwards from that sometimes, in addition to working forward. Trinity Academy will be a beacon of hope in the community as we strive to nurture joyful children whose hearts are inspired to love God and mankind, whose minds can discern what is true, good, and beautiful, and who speak with eloquence to boldly proclaim and defend truth. Our legacy will be their devoted lives marked by compassion, integrity, and a continued longing for knowledge and God's wisdom as they bear Christ's image in the world. I'm going to read it one more time, because you guys don't have it in front of you. Trinity Academy will be a beacon of hope in the community as we strive to nurture joyful children whose hearts are inspired to love God and mankind, whose minds can discern what is true, good, and beautiful, and who speak with eloquence to boldly proclaim and defend truth. Our legacy will be their devoted lives marked by compassion, integrity, and a continued longing for knowledge and God's wisdom as they bear Christ's image in the world. That's our hope and that's our goal as we do the things that we do. And our most valuable written tool that we have in order to accomplish this is the Bible. There's nothing more powerful than God's words to impart God's wisdom. And there's nothing more powerful to inspire a love for God than the story that is told in the scriptures. So if you'll flip your pages over you will see a passage from the Psalms. Is it Psalm 104? Is that what you guys have? Yeah. We are going to read this. We are going to read it in unison. So if everybody will please stand up in your seats. Now, if you are in grammar school, you might be memorizing this. If you were in upper school, you may be taking this and you may be parsing it next to a piece of poetry and talking about the similarities. There are lots of things that we do with Scripture, but Scripture is an integral part of everything that we do. So, here we go. O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. The earth is full of your creatures. Here is the sea, great and wide, which teems with creatures innumerable, living things both great and great. Thank you. There go the ships, and Leviathan, which you formed to play in. These all look to you, to give them their food in due season. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they are filled with good things. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die and return to their dust. When you send forth your spirit, they are created, and you renew the face of the ground. May the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. Who looks on the earth and it trembles, who touches the mountains and they smoke. I will sing to the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praise to my God while I have being. May my meditation be pleasing to him, for I rejoice in the Lord. Psalm 104, verses 24 through 34. Go ahead and be seated. Another thing that we do, another term that we use is copy work. When this session was longer, I had you copy that entire thing in cursive, because our students have to learn cursive, and so you guys can do cursive. I will tell you that copy work, since my children started classical education, has become one of my favorite things in the world. I now copy with my devotions regularly because I find it so incredibly helpful. It slows your brain down. It forces you to focus on one word of Scripture at a time, or one phrase of Scripture at a time. You look at it, you hold that phrase in your mind, and as you are writing it, you cannot help but really parse out that phrase. And writing, say, Paul's letter to the Philippians, we talked about that earlier. Try to write Paul's whole letter to the Philippians, and you can read it in 20 minutes. You can't write it in 20 minutes, and it really makes you think about Paul's mindset and what it took for him to compose this letter and how intentional he was in his words. Why did he use this word instead of this word? Why did he say this way instead of this way? Copy work is a beautiful thing if I had more time, but I'm not going to make you do it because we have other things to do. So Mistress Mary met the robin, and after she met the robin, she met the gardener, and the gardener's name is Ben Weatherstaff. Ben Weatherstaff is cranky. He is extremely cranky, and Mary has finally met somebody crankier than her. But she starts to win Ben Weatherstaff over because she won't go away. She continues to be in his business, because he's the gardener and he's supposed to be taking care of things, and she decides she really kind of likes it outside. So she develops this relationship with Ben Weatherstaff, and he tries to kick her away, but she just won't go away. So really, all of a sudden, Mary now has two friends. She has the robin, and she has Ben Weatherstaff. And then one night, Mary is in her room, and she is not sleeping because there are strange noises in this strange house. And one of the noises sounds like moaning. And the servants have told her, don't worry about the moaning, it's none of your business, don't poke your nose where it's not invited. But our little contrary Mary doesn't listen to them, and she goes poking around, and what does she discover but a cousin? She has a cousin named Colin, who is sickly and in bed, and Colin doesn't get out of bed because they've told him that he's going to be a hunchback like his father. And so he stays in bed all day and moans that he can feel his hump growing. And he sends the servants scattering around trying to obey his wishes. And Mary comes in and says, "You're being wrapped." Takes one to know one, right? And he says, "Nobody talks to me like that." And she said, "Well, I do." And so now Mary has 3 friends. She has the Robin, she has Bedmother's Dad, and she has her cousin Colin. And eventually she also meets a young man named Dickon, whose sister is Mary's maid. And Dickon is one of those ethereal characters in literature who you can't quite put your finger on. He's supposed to be almost like the wind itself. He's the type of person who's super engaging and super charismatic, and he maybe even isn't all the way a person. In a fairy tale, he wouldn't be a person. He would probably be an animal. Or the author is trying to convey those concepts of humanity that are not hard and fast, that are not forceful and heavy like Mendelssohn's music. They're more the flitty and the flighty and the imaginative part of it. So Dickon can tame all the animals. When he comes into the garden with Mary, the animals land on him. The fawns come across the lawn to eat out of his hand. They all know him to be incredibly gentle. So Mary begins to look at Dickon not only as a friend, but a mentor. Somebody who can teach her things, and she aspires to be a little bit more like Dickon. There's not a contrary bone in Dickon's body. He is kind, and he acquiesces to help everybody and everything. So as Mary and Colin and Dickon and Ben and the Robin are kind of a little gang. And eventually they find a secret garden. And that secret garden is a garden that has been locked up since Colin's mother died, because it was Colin's mother's garden. There's all kinds of wonderful things in this book, and I'm only giving you a very short summary of it, so you should read it. But Colin, who has never left the house and cannot walk, convinces Mary and Dickon to take him out in a wheelchair. He goes out to the garden, and slowly, Colin starts to look at the world around him and to notice that there's more than just himself in the world. And that's one of the beautiful things about the way this author writes. She gives you these changes in these characters so slowly and so imperceptibly that all of a sudden you look back and you think, wait a second, how is Colin digging in the ground and helping with the garden when he was screaming in his bed at all of the servants and refusing to leave the house? How did this change occur? It happened so gradually and so slowly that you blink and you miss it. But Colin one day says to all of them, he's become very cerebral and very thoughtful. Colin also doesn't have a good relationship with his father, never sees his father, and so he's starting to learn how to communicate with other people. And so they're in the garden, Colin and Mary and Dickon, and Colin begins. When Mary found this garden, it looked quite dead. Then something began pushing things up out of the soil and making things out of nothing. One day things weren't there, and another they were. I had never watched things before, and it made me feel very curious. I kept saying to myself, what is it? What is it? It's something. It can't be nothing. I don't know its name, so I call it magic. I've never seen the sunrise, but Mary and Dickon have, and from what they tell me, I'm sure that is magic too. Something pushes it up, draws it. Sometimes, since I've been in the garden, I've looked up to the trees and the sky, and I've had a strange feeling of being happy, as if something were pushing and drawing my chest and making me breathe fast. Magic is always pushing, drawing, and making things nothing. Everything is made out of magic: leaves and trees, birds and flowers, badgers and foxes and squirrels and people. So it must be all around us, in this garden and in all the places. Colin says this, and then later, again, he keeps working and he decides that he's going to walk. He's going to learn how to walk, and that's just it. He is now convinced that the life that he was leading is not a life at all. The magic works best when you work yourself. Colin said this morning. You can feel it in your bones and muscles. I'm going to read books about bones and muscles, but I'm going to write a book about magic. I'm making it up now so that I can keep finding out things. It was not long after he had said this that he laid down his trowel and stood up on his feet. He had been silent for several minutes, and they had seen that he was thinking out lectures, as he often did. When he dropped his trowel and stood upright, it seemed to Mary and Dickon a sudden strong thought had made him do it. He stretched himself out to his tallest height, and he threw out his arms exultantly. Color glowed in his face, and his strange eyes widened with joyfulness, and all at once he realized something to the full. "Mary! Dickon!" he cried. "Just look at me!" They stopped their weeding and looked at him. "Do you remember the first morning you brought me in here?" he demanded. Dickon was looking at him very hard. Being an animal charmer, he could see more things than most people could, and many of them were things he never talked about. He saw some of them now in this boy. "Aye, that we do," he answered. Mary looked hard too, but she said nothing. "Just this minute," said Colin, "all at once I remembered it myself. When I looked at my hand digging with the trowel, and I had to stand up on my feet to see if it was real. It is real. I'm well. I'm well." Colin spent his whole life saying, I'm sick, and now it's completely changed. "Aye, that thou art," said Dickon. I'm well, said Colin again, and his face went quite red all over. He had known it before in a way. He had hoped it, and felt it, and thought about it. But just at that minute, something had rushed all through him. A sort of rapturous belief and realization, and it had been so strong that he could not help calling out, "I shall live forever and ever and ever. I shall find out thousands of things. I shall find out about people and creatures and everything that grows, just like Dickon. And I shall never stop making magic. I'm well. I feel as if I want to shout something thankful, something joyful." Then Weatherstaff, who had been working near a rose bush, glanced around. "Well, I might sing the doxology," he suggested in his driest grunt. He had no opinion of the doxology, and he did not make the suggestion with any particular reverence. But Colin was of an exploring mind, and he knew nothing about the doxology. "What is that?" he inquired. "Well, Dickon can sing it for thee, I'll warrant," replied Ben Weatherstaff. Dickon answered with his animal charmer's smile. "They sing it in church," he said. "Mother says she believes the skylarks sing it when they get up in the morning." "If she says that, it must be a nice song," Colin answered. "I've never been in a church myself. I was always too ill. Sing it, Dickon, I want to hear it." Dickon was quite simple and unaffected about it. He understood what Colin felt better than Colin did himself. He understood by a sort of instinct so natural that he did not know it was understanding. He pulled off his cap and looked around, still smiling. "Thou must take off the cap," he said to Colin, "and so must thou, Ben, and then thou must stand up." Colin took off his cap, and the sun shone and warmed his thick hair as he watched Dickon intently. Ben Weatherstaff scrambled up from his knees, bared his head too, with a sort of puzzled, half-resentful look on his old face, as if he didn't know exactly why he was doing this remarkable thing. Dickon stood out among the trees and rose bushes and began to sing in a quite simple, matter-of-fact way, in a nice, strong boy voice. Do you guys know the doxology? Will you sing it with me? Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. When he had finished, Ben Weatherstaff was standing quite still with his jaw set obstinately, but with a disturbed look in his eyes fixed on Colin. Colin's face was thoughtful and appreciative. "It's a very nice song," he said. "I like it. Perhaps it means just what I mean when I want to shout out that I'm thankful. Perhaps they are both the same thing. I want to sing it." It's my song. How does it begin again, Dickon? I love this book. And I love the journey that Dickon and Mary and Colin get to go on in this book. And when our students read that and they get to hear Colin's heart and go along with him, they cannot help but be moved with something like that. So yes, we study verbs, and yes, we narrate passages, but ultimately when we are looking to shape their hearts, we want them to hear what Colin heard. We want them to sing the doxology from their seats. We want them to go outside and look at the world as God has told us to look at the world. You all probably know who C.S. Lewis is. He's an author, a British author, and he wrote The Chronicles of Narnia, which we read all of them. We read many of his books here. He said something about the word beauty that I think is absolutely lovely. He said the books or the music in which we thought beauty was located, and we have read a beautiful book and we have listened to beautiful music. The books or the music in which we thought beauty was located will betray us if we trusted to them. It was not in them. It only came through them. And what came through them was longing. We all have a longing for Christ in our life, and our children all have a longing for Christ in their heart. And when we read good and true and beautiful things, that screams it from the rooftops, like Colin heard it, in a way that he had never even understood. And that is our prayer and our hope for our children here at Trinity Academy. That they will hear like Colin does, and they will respond like Colin did, with Christ in his heart and singing a praise to God. Thank you very much for your attention and for being here today. We are all finished. I think we have about a 15-minute break before we go into our next session. You're welcome to ask any questions that you have if you have any questions.